Hey team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is Ukraine War news update, second part thereof, for the 20th of December 2023. I'm hopefully going to be a little bit more upbeat. I was a bit downbeat. I'd just been on the back of watching Andrew Perpetual's live stream about the mapping update from yesterday, from last night, before I did my first video. And it does, Ukrainians are having some serious challenges in places like Bakhmut and Novomikhailivka, among others. And so that, that realization of how we as allies are not helping enough. I mean, we're never helping enough, right? But it's because, well, for whatever reason it is, but, generally not enough people in the world see this as important as it really is in terms of global security going forwards. And as a result, there's not enough ammunition in Ukraine. I mean, that's how I translate that. We haven't realized the importance enough that we've translated that into material help to Ukraine when they have needed it, what they've needed when they've needed it. We have drip fed things too late, and that has led to a counteroffensive that wasn't effective enough on the land. It was effective in other ways, but not in territorial gains, and the position where the Russians are now on the offensive and the Ukrainians don't have enough kit to defend adequately in certain places. They don't have enough ammunition. And that's really frustrating. It's really frustrating for me. So now I'm going to have brought myself down again. No, I'm going to be positive. But just to talk about other negative things, I did write an article yesterday for Only Sky called Dealing with the Demons of Disinformation. A bit of alliteration there for you. That is a piece. I mean, it does reflect my own political views, so, be wary of that. But it is also to mention artificial intelligence and technology in terms of, being able to fact check and fight disinformation kind of on a live basis. So please go check that out. Tell me what you think. Right, now to go to aid and military aid, the segment we normally start with in this second video. Zelensky has said that Ukraine is to produce 1 million drones next year, and that came from his press conference that he gave yesterday. We're actually going to dip again into that. I know I did that in the last video, but a little bit more in this one. Ukraine will produce 1 million drones in 2024. This is obviously incredible. If they can actually do that, this is an incredible number, and that will surely put them above the Russian capacity to in terms of drone production. That will give them an advantage on the front line. The ability to also strike Russia in Russian territories with distance drones, these ones that could fly up to, say, 700 kilometers or whatnot, will also be hugely important. So this to me is what I was thinking about, doing a video of all the things Ukraine needs, like doing a video of just going through successes, maybe doing like a PowerPoint, and I might do that over the next few days. Like, to succeed, they need this in place, they need this in place, they need to do this. From my somewhat limited viewpoint, talking about drones, with your help, Timothy Schneider and 4 other professors have raised $950,000 for the Safe Skies initiative, part of the United 24 the project. Our ambassador, along with 4 other outstanding professors, raised funds for 2,500 sensors that will help protect Sumy, Odessa, and Mykolaiv and Kherson Oblast from drones and missiles. This is really good news. Obviously, this is not only these are not only areas where the Russians target, but also there are areas where missiles and drones pass through. And as a result, if you can get sensors sorted out here, and then those sensors are then expanded to other regions, that's going to be really helpful for air defenses. So Timothy Schneider wouldn't be himself if he didn't decide to keep going. Quote, "I'd like to see if we can do the same for 4 more regions. This is a season for generosity, and we can all do our part." He's raising another $950K to protect Kharkiv, Kirovohrad, Poltava, and Cherkasy Oblasts. Safe Skies is an innovative sensor system for detecting air targets and predicting their course for further neutralization. It proved its effectiveness against both cruise missiles and Shahed 136 drones. So you can support. I think United 24 as a project is one of these things that is a decent, reputable charity. It's the kind of state-run charity, but the economies of scale that you can get from that are really good. It's probably one where, you know, bigger donors go and help rather than these smaller help get this unit a drone. Whatever floats your boat. I should do one on charities, a video on charities, but I probably don't know enough. I try and feature people who are doing charities, you know, whether it be Rick the Ukrainian or Valeria from Country of Peace, or, you know, from Bristol with Love, or Base.ua, all these people doing great stuff for Ukraine, and leave James on his American in Ukraine Why Ukraine YouTube channel. I think this is all really, really useful. So, you know, whatever floats your boats, guys, you know, you commit to whatever charity you see fit. I end up just doing lots of different ones, but I do hope and try to make sure that they are reputable, that these are people that are known, above board, you know, charitable sources, and it's good when they then produce, you know, video evidence of their stuff being used as well. Like Constantine, for example, you know, will show videos of like, well, this is what the drones that I've raised funds for. This is them in action and what they're doing. Anyway, right, going on to Japan here. So Tokyo is preparing a significant policy shift in its defense export rules that allow Washington to transfer additional Patriot missiles to Kyiv. So Japan's a funny country by point of fact. They don't have an army, they have a defense force, and as a result, their kind of defense strategy, or their military strategy over the last 70 years since World War II, has looked somewhat different to what you might see from, say, a US defense strategy. And they have certain terms and conditions, you know, that align with that strategy in terms of export of equipment, etc., etc. Well, that could well be changing. The whole strategy appears to be changing quite a lot at the moment, and the US is appealing to Japan to get a good dozen Patriot missiles from Japan, possibly to the US, to then backfill to send stuff to Ukraine, or maybe directly to Ukraine. But anyway, hopefully that will come to pass. Now, the US will allocate $150 million to Ukraine over 5 years to support the digital transformation program, according to US Ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. Now, this again is not just the US giving money. There'll be strings attached, as I keep saying, but I have to repeat it in case people go, oh, God, that's us giving money again, and that could be building hospitals. This is all part of an economic strategy for the US, you could argue, or for any country. I talked about this. Go and check out my extra video from yesterday that talks about how Denmark are supporting Mykolaiv as an oblast, and it is like a positive sum game, which means that both sides benefit. Like, Ukraine obviously need that money, and they need the infrastructure being rebuilt and reconstructed. And Denmark can invest in there, but they get a return on investment. So it's like, when we invest here, there's a minimum. You have to, at a minimum, use Danish companies or entities to supply your reconstruction here. So one of the rules they have is minimum of 30% Danish stuff, but actually they're using 70% at the moment Danish stuff. So that is a benefit. You know, that is literally creating jobs in Denmark. Now, you could say that money could be invested directly into Denmark straight off, you know, just inward investment. But hopefully this is all about fostering connections. So there's a shipbuilding area. So actually, you know, Denmark being involved in Mykolaiv can pay off, you know, big time going forward, but it might be long term. Investing in Mykolaiv as a shipbuilding area, and that can benefit the maritime industry in, you know, whether it's in design or whether it's in actual shipbuilding back in Denmark. You know, there are benefits to investing in Ukraine that might not be the case in direct investment into your own country. But it's also not a case of either or. It's like both and. Will we invest in our country and in other countries? But actually, we might have invested over there in some kind of Chinese establishments or something, or in this country or that country. We're going to take that and we're going to put that investment into Ukraine, because A, is morally obligatory, I think, but actually it's economically important to do so as well. etc., etc. You've heard all the arguments before, right? Similar to that, though, here's a Euromaidan Press again talking about this, and I will keep going over this because it is important, and there are new viewers that watch my videos on a daily basis just to reiterate these points. So the actual military aid sent by the US to Ukraine so far totals around $23 billion, which is just 0.18% of the last 2 years' federal budgets. Ukraine debilitated 40% of Russia's military with this, while aid enabled upgrades for the American forces too. So as retired US Army General John Ferrari said, giving older equipment to Ukraine allows US military to replace it with more advanced systems it otherwise couldn't afford. So in other words, this expedites the improvement of the US Army, of the US armed forces in terms of their equipment. As the White House warns of Ukraine aid expiration, the story goes beyond figures. US aid fortifies Ukraine, stimulates the American economy, and reinforces defense capabilities. A multifaceted narrative of strategic aid at work. Lots more detail about that. You can see that in the Euromaidan Press article, or you can just watch my videos where I consistently talk about this. Now, David D then says, would someone please, and he's annoyed here, investigate the administration, so the American administration, on why it just sold at an insanely cheap price our last 500 extra Bradleys to Morocco. From reports, it was done last month after Ukraine begged for them. Was it to keep them out of Ukraine? I would like to know. And no, we don't have another large pile of Bradleys to donate now. But actually, there may be a little bit more to this. So we know that Morocco gave a bunch of T-72 tanks to Ukraine. So as someone rightly says here, a report by Army Recognition on December the 14th, 2023, so just recently, disclosed that T-72B main battle tanks that underwent modernization by the Czech company Excalibur Army for Morocco was scheduled for delivery to Ukraine. Has there been a kind of trade offer? And could this be a way around sort of military aid assistance, direct assistance to Ukraine? Could this be a way of the US Army saying, okay, we're going to sell these to this country, who are then going to give their stuff to this country, who are going to upgrade it and give it to Ukraine? The deal was for $10 billion. That's a heck of a deal for 100 old T-72s that needed to be rebuilt, David then replies. I think that describes a deal with Morocco, not necessarily the value of the T-72s. Disappointing Ukraine didn't get priority, though. My guess, says someone else, is that this money doesn't come from the budget allocated to Ukraine, which is very limited at this point because of the Russian compromised GOP. So it was a way to provide Ukraine with 100 tanks without budgeting it as Ukraine aid. And I think there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff happening behind the scenes where the US Department of Defense are going to be going, holy crap, right? Senate is at a standstill. That's now stalled until the new year, apparently, according to Reuters. So nothing's going to happen until January in terms of getting aid to the US, and probably right on into January. So what can we as the Department of Defense, who are really bloody worried about this, what can we do? Well, okay, so they've got some of this and the Ukraine needs some of that. But we've got some of these things that they might need, so they can give that to that. Okay. And so the wheels are turning, and we might see stuff getting to Ukraine in ways that we might not otherwise have expected. Okay. Moving on, Italy's cabinet has passed a law decree that allows it to continue supplying. By the way, that's a lot of speculation from me, but take it with a pinch of salt, etc. Italy's cabinet has passed a law decree that allows it to continue supplying Ukraine with, quote, means, materials and equipment until the end of 2024 to support its war effort against Russia, a defense ministry statement said. So this is really good. Italy hasn't probably helped enough, although Meloni's been really strong. It is one of the major economies of the world, and it is down the list of military equipment donors. But this puts Italy in a good stead to be able to give slightly longer term. So this is kind of what the Biden package was wanting to do, which is say, right, we're going to release aid to Ukraine that should last a year. Although this doesn't put a monetary value on it, it's about committing to longer term, not just ad hoc. Oh, we're going to give 10 of these and 20 of those. Right, there you go. And then work on, okay, we're going to give 15 of these. It's like, right, going forward to the end of 2024, right, we're going to be allowed to give you help. And then it just allows this long-term aid project to continue with collaboration from many nations. Okay. France will be joining in the training of Ukrainian pilots on fighter jets. Now, France don't operate, as far as I know, things like F-16. They have their own jets, their own air manufacturing capabilities. Airframe manufacturing capabilities. So the Ministry of Defense of France says that France will join in the training of Ukrainian pilots. It's about the initial preparation, so it's probably not going to be about particular to certain airframes, just initial flight preparation or training, which will then be continued by the European partners. So we do the initial stuff because we can, even though we fly Mirage and Rafale and whatever, but we can give you the basics and then send them on to other countries to then give the F-16 particular training. And I think that's kind of what the UK is doing as well, because we don't fly those either. Breaking: Ukraine announces plans to mobilize between 450,000 and 500,000 soldiers, although that's not quite true, but this is hugely important. And I discussed this in the last video. Ukrainians need boots on the ground. The army want to mobilize this amount. It's going through, I think, analyses at the moment on the behest of Zelensky. He wants to know, what's going on there. This would be addressing the issues of rotation and demobilization. Zelensky is currently coordinated with Zaluzhny and Defense Minister Umerov on creating a 1 million man strong Ukrainian army. And then German aid to Ukraine. I've interviewed this guy. Go and check back from last week. One of my extras was an interview with him, a pre-recorded interview. Really interesting, and I'm going to do that again. He's a sort of an autodidact on Ukraine aid, as in he's taught himself a lot about what's going on with German aid to Ukraine, and he has a Twitter handle, he has a spreadsheet and a blog that details it all. He's absolutely fantastic effort from him, and really interesting to talk to, so please check that out. So 2 measures in the new agreement regarding the 2024 budget in Germany have impact on Ukraine. I'll briefly discuss them here and explain what they mean. So this is just for people who want to know a little bit more about what's going on in Germany. 1, reprocurement of material. 2, suspension of the debt brake for more aid to Ukraine. So reprocurement of material in the new budget year, at least 520 million euros will be saved by the fact that reprocured material that was handed over to Ukraine from Bundeswehr stocks will have to be paid for from the Bundeswehr 100 billion euro special fund. In my view, this means that the Bundeswehr will think twice in future about giving material from its own stocks to Ukraine. That is, of course, a negative thing at first, especially in emergencies. Military aid could always be provided to Ukraine from the Bundeswehr because a delivery only takes days or a few weeks instead of months when it has to be refurbished or produced first. Of course, the money is then also missing, and the Bundeswehr is penalised twice. Firstly, because the equipment is missing in its own soldiers' ranks, and then again because they have to buy new equipment, and then there is no money for the planned procurements. In other words, if they give stuff from their own, it's from the own Bundeswehr budget to Ukraine, and then that money's already gone, and then they have to buy that stuff, but with their own budget, but that budget is already being hit by giving stuff to Ukraine. So the aid to Ukraine is coming out of the military budget. It's not extra. And the German military has been underfunded for some time. So suspension of the debt brake for more aid to Ukraine. This step in particular has been discussed increasingly in Germany in the recent days and weeks. Should other countries reduce their aid to Ukraine, e.g. the USA, and provide less, Germany will step in if necessary. To this end, the debt brake is to be suspended. To explain it very briefly, the debt brake is designed to restrict budget deficits and limit the issuance of government debt. Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck said in an interview yesterday, quote, "If we have to extend the aid by billions, we must also approve this emergency measure." To put it plainly, money should not be the reason for failure in the end. If necessary, Germany will take on new debt, even though this is something they really want to avoid at all costs. Apart from that, Chancellor Scholz announced days ago in the German Bundestag that the 8 billion euros in military aid for Ukraine will come in 2024, and at least 6 billion euros will also be earmarked for Ukrainian refugees in Germany. Hopefully this explains at least roughly everything that is new or interesting. So that is really good. So some slightly annoying or challenging news first, but then good news with the debt brake suspension. Now, it must be so let's talk about NATO funding. So the idea is that each member of NATO, each member country has to spend or should spend 2% of their GDP on defense spending. And presently, there are more countries looking like doing that this year, 2023. So it's moved from 7 countries now to 11 countries, which is really good. And even Poland's overtaken the US in terms of real terms analysis of spending, GDP, etc., etc. Anyway, I was speaking to someone who was having a go at loads of countries, an American having a go at loads of countries for not doing that, and America does. There are lots to remember here. One, I mean, defense spending is part of the American economic strategy more than anywhere else on earth, and so they can much more easily spend that because they've got themselves used to that. They spend inordinate amounts of money on defense, but it's part of their DNA, and actually they use that to gain a return on investment in terms of exports and security. As I keep saying, go and watch Perun's video on this back from some months ago. Whereas the kind of the peace dividend has meant that other nations that don't have defense at the central part of their economic strategy kind of are less likely to spend that in times of peace. And now these European nations have gone, oh my goodness, right, we need to spend loads more. But you've also got to remember that in helping Ukraine, there's going to be an awful lot of money being spent that won't be attributed to defense spending as well. And you could even include, as mentioned here, spending on the war in Ukraine also means humanitarian aid, and also means spending money on, say, refugees. Now, is that military spending? Well, not technically, but it's part of the helping Ukraine in war. And so, look, you know, we can spend 500 million on weapons and 500 million on refugees. That's 1 billion, right? But that's all part of the same package, and you know, it all comes from the same pot. And so, you know, we can argue about 2% and not 2%, but there are countries in Europe that are spending on refugees in ways that the US isn't, right? And so it's slightly unfair to say you need to spend more on the military and ignore the fact that they're actually spending more on supporting Ukraine as a whole in ways that maybe the US isn't. So these things are nuanced, but that's not to say that there aren't genuine criticisms of European countries not spending enough on defence. And they are moving forward. Like Sweden has spent 0.2% more of their on their defence as 0.2% of GDP on defence over the last year. So they've increased by 0.2, although they aren't at 2% yet. They're not in NATO yet, but there are movements forward. But just remember that this is nuanced and it goes beyond just spending on military aid. And I don't even know whether spending on military aid, so buying a bunch of kit to send to Ukraine, so say the UK spending, I don't know, 200 million on kit from around the world to send to Ukraine, is that included in defence spending? Arguably not. It's not spent on our defence. It's spent on directly on Ukraine's defence type thing. So, are there other ways where these nations are spending money, but that isn't actually seen as defence spending as a percentage of GDP? There's lots to be discussed in that. Anyway, Lithuanian MOD is continuing their unwavering support for Ukraine. Another shipment of essential field service equipment and tens of thousands of dry wood food packs has reached Ukrainian armed forces today. The same question can be, does this get included in their defence spending? I mean, this is military aid, in essence, to Ukraine, as in it's food for their soldiers on the front line. We remain committed to helping Ukraine, recognizing the importance of such aid during winter. Okay, the US imposes sanctions on entities involved in production of Iranian drones. The US Treasury announced a series of restrictions against individuals and entities in Iran and other countries that provided parts for the production of Iranian military drones. This is really good news. One might ask, why hasn't that already been done? But we can ask that about all sorts of sanctions that end up getting put in place. good news. And indeed, it's interesting to see that in light of nearly 3/4 of the roughly 2,500 foreign components found in Russian weaponry and analysed by Ukrainian authorities were made by US producers, a database by the National Agency on Corruption Protection reveals. Now, the problem with this, as I said before, there's no point blaming any individual country. So in this case, okay, the US countries have made a lot of the parts in these weapons, but the reality is there's not a lot you can do about that apart from try and shut down the loopholes that basically you sell a component to a third party entity who sells it to another, and it ends up in Russia. It's like, can you blame the manufacturer for that? In this case, the US have made all these components, as you can see there, a number of companies involved in that, sending them to Russia. Is it their fault that they've ended up in Russia? Arguably, no. So there needs to be legislation in place to stop it being sold and sold and sold and sold. Somehow those loopholes need to be closed, if indeed that is at all possible. But it is worrying. In St. Petersburg, 11 men were given summonses to register for military service during a citizenship obtaining ceremony, according to Russian media. My goodness, and this shows you that the Russians need boots on the ground just as much as Ukrainians, right? St. Petersburg. So 11 people are going to say, well done, you are now a Russian citizen. Congratulations, this is something you want. It's something you need in order to work or do it. Well done, excellent. You've passed the test. Right, now you're going to the front line to fight for the Russian army. Now that you're a Russian citizen, you are almost certainly going to either be killed or maimed in the next 8 months. So thanks for that. Yeah, interesting. Right, on to geopolitical stuff. Sorry, lots of things to talk about. Western countries may legalise the confiscation of frozen Russian assets by recognising themselves as the victims of the war in Ukraine, according to the Financial Times, citing sources. This is so super important. There's so much talk about this, but it hasn't actually been done yet. Let's just get on and do it. According to a document from US officials, this list may include Ukraine's allies that provided financial support to the Ukrainian economy and armed forces during the war. The funds may be transferred to Ukraine partly through international banks. However, critics warn that such steps could undermine the confidence of countries that place their financial reserves abroad in euros or dollars. In other words, if other companies from other nations, do that and place their reserves abroad, if there's precedence that those reserves could be confiscated if the country in which they operate does something dodgy, then they're less likely to put those reserves in, say, US dollars or euros or whatever. So there could be ramifications for this. But in principle, it seems like a no-brainer. I've been saying this for a long time. It's just like trying to get over those legal hurdles. German authorities as well want to confiscate financial assets of Russian financial institutions totaling beyond more than 720 million euros for attempting to circumvent sanctions. Unknown persons responsible for the Russian financial institution attempted to withdraw the money from the German bank responsible and probably transfer them to Russia after the sanctions came into force from the 3rd of June 2022. However, the transfer was not executed by the German bank responsible. Confiscation proceeding was now requested because no specific person can currently be prosecuted or convicted for the offence. Okay, so basically there's the German Attorney General has come out and said that they're looking at using 720 million euros of frozen assets, again, to support Ukraine. This is brilliant. I mean, if you're worrying about money, then let's use Russian money. US senators have made progress in negotiations on aid to Ukraine, but a decision will not take place this year. Quote, negotiations are ongoing and our goal is to get something done as soon as we get back. So that's according to Chuck Schumer. Now, apparently, the Senate has now, up sticks and gone on recess, and this will not happen until next year. So there will be no US aid. I mean, we didn't really think there was going to be, but that's confirmation that there won't. Now, Zelensky spoke to the media, answering various types of questions. I did dip into this previously, but let's quickly go through what he said. The winter is different. It is also with challenges, unfortunately with losses, but still with less. We are becoming more powerful every month. I had several business trips with the team. I will not say the number, several new Patriot systems will protect our country in the winter. I promise not to say the number until they are protected. So interesting. They have 5 Patriot systems being bought directly off Raytheon, so hopefully that will be part of that. The General Staff proposed mobilising an additional 450 to 500,000 people. Mobilisation in this format will cost the state 500 billion hryvnia. I would like to see the calculation from the Cabinet of Ministers regarding such measures. A comprehensive plan will be prepared by the military and submitted to the Verkhovna Rada, that's their parliament, for consideration. Zelensky on the question of whether Ukraine can gradually come to the point of losing the war. No. We were in the most difficult situation. We were almost completely occupied, at least the central regions, the logistics of our state, roads, railways, food, delivery. We were in a complete blockade. We got out. Now we have a different situation. And that's really true. You got to remember where they were back in March, April of 2022, right? They're in a wholly different position now. So although there are some localized challenges for the Ukrainians, and again, to mention Bakhmut and Novomykhailivka, it's not like it was over a year ago. So no one knows whether the war will end in 2024, and neither do the partners. All predictions are just opinions. The Russian Federation did not achieve a single result on the battlefield in 2023. Therefore, there is nothing to say about defeat. The USA will not betray us. What we agreed on will be fulfilled. I will summarize assistance that is already available for next year. Belgium, 1.7 billion. Denmark, 4.2 billion. Korea, 2.3 billion. Latvia, Lithuania, Netherlands, hundreds of millions. Norway, 7.5 billion. France, 2 billion. Germany, 8 billion. Sweden, 0.5 billion. Japan, 2 billion. This is a powerful base. We expect 50 billion from the EU and 61 billion from the USA, the president said. Their policy is unfriendly towards us most of the times. This is to do with Viktor Orban. When I was in Argentina, I asked Viktor Orban if he could name me one reason why he doesn't support us in the EU. He couldn't name one. I asked him why we can't just arrange a meeting between our countries, and he could also not mention a single reason. So that is just intransigence from Viktor Orban. Zelensky mentioned that about the Hungarian-Ukrainian relationship. Quote, the war strategy, so he goes on, the war strategy will not change. The borders of 1991s are our territories. Tactics may change after the results of the counteroffensive are taken into account. We will never support such a thing. That part of Ukraine is in NATO and a part of Ukraine controlled by Russia is not in NATO. So there'd been these ideas that you could have NATO membership, but it wouldn't include the Donbass and occupied regions, and then they could sue for peace. And he's like, no, we ain't having that. So he also suggested that Trump's election can strongly affect the war. So the result of the upcoming 2024 US presidential election can very strongly influence the course of Russia's war against Ukraine. He said, according to the latest polls, Trump is a front runner in the upcoming presidential elections. Okay, there's a long time left in those elections, but what is worrying is that Trump has said if he's re-elected, he will ask Europe to reimburse the US the $200 billion spent for arming Ukraine and will impose huge fees to NATO allies. This is not cool, right? I know there are many of you who are fans of Trump out there, and you tell me on a daily basis, and you have a go at me for having a go at, say, Trump or Republicans or whatever. I am having a go at people who say things that are just not cool, and this is not cool. So as Paul C. here says, I guess it's time for Europe to start a serious collective defense program. The US is not reliable anymore, says this person. Well, actually, that's what you're seeing. You're starting to see Germany put things in place. And we just talked about that from German support in Ukraine. So talking about putting things in place such that if the US can't fulfill assistance packages to Ukraine, then actually Germany steps up and Europe steps up as well. So, it's interesting that the Europe are starting to stand up a little bit more, which is good news. And you could say, well, that's a success for Trump. Trump has made that happen, or Republicans have made that happen. So yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, like that kind of approach is really dangerous in terms of international, in terms of foreign policy. I think the US going isolationist does not help the US. It doesn't help the world. And it certainly doesn't help the US. And then, Anton Garaschenko talking about how Zelensky mentioned his chat with Viktor Orban and how Viktor Orban had no reasons for what his position is. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron said that France and Britain will support Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion, quote, for as long as it takes. Now, there's a lot of criticism about this phrase, for as long as it takes. It's a bit vague and meaningless. And actually, No Reports probably should have said what the rest of the AP News, the Associated Press News, talked about, which is this. So Cameron, speaking after talks with Colonna, so that's the French counterpart in Paris, said that if the economies of Ukraine's Western partners are calculated together, quote, we outmatch the Russian economy by 24-1 or more. What we have to do is make the economic strength and that commitment pay, he said. If we can, I have no doubt that we can make sure that Russian President Vladimir Putin loses. So we can make sure that Putin loses. And it's essential that he does lose. So it's more than just like we're in for as long as it takes. We're in for as long as it takes, and we need to make sure Putin loses. In fact, that needs to be changed, and we need to ensure Ukrainian victory, because those two things can be quite different. But nonetheless, this is a slight change in rhetoric. Hand in hand, since the beginning, our two countries are working together to ensure that the Russian aggression is not rewarded and it is a failure, according to Colonna. Cameron said that the support for Ukraine from the UK, no longer an EU member, and France will continue for as long as it takes. The first act, he said, was a stunning failure of Russia to achieve its objectives when Russian invasion forces first thrust for the Ukrainian capital Kyiv in February and March of 2022 and were beaten back. The second act was Ukraine's counteroffensive in the summer of 2022, he said. Quote, the brilliance of the Ukrainians showed in driving back the Russians, taking back half of the territory that had been lost, pushing them back across the Black Sea. Quote, the third act has been more difficult on land, he said, seeming reference to Ukraine's disappointing counteroffensive this summer. Quote, but the fourth act is yet to be written, and we must make sure we write it in the correct way with our friends and partners in the Western world. So that is good rhetoric. I'm hopeful that Cameron seems to be at the helm here. There's a lot of people talking, Ukraine, the latest podcast, keep mentioning this, that there needs to be someone in Europe to gather everyone around them, to be the focal point of support for Ukraine, in driving the momentum, in being the ringleader. There needs to be a European or American ringleader. There needs to be someone that is just saying, come on guys, let's sort this shit out and let's do it. Let's do everything we can to support Ukraine, and here's how we are going to do it. And you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and they're going to do that. Yeah? Who is that person? Can it be Cameron? Is he strong enough for that? I don't know. It would be great if there could be someone. And as I mentioned before, unfortunately, it just really helps that person is an English speaker, proficient English speaker. And that's, unfortunately, then it has, it informs a selection bias for people from the UK or the US or whatever. But nonetheless, there does need to be that person. Right, let's go on to, what am I doing? Russia says that the recent US-Finland defense cooperation deal won't go unanswered. This sounds very much like, what's it called? What's that word? Oh yeah, an outright threat. So the US-Finland bilateral defense cooperation deal threatens the security of the Russian Federation, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova. Of course, they would see what the US did with Finland as a threat, but now they are ramping up the rhetoric. Whereas that was just a change of activity, not the rhetoric to go with it. Russians are pushing back with some rhetoric there. Here, Tim White says, the Tsar has spoken again today. Amid the usual propaganda and lies, this was a highlight for me. So this came from Russia. This came from Putin, sorry, a quote. No one in the world has such experience of real armed struggle as the Russian army. He's trying to up the rhetoric and saying how wonderful the Russian army is and how they're the most experienced in the world. But the reason, Tim White says, wonder why that could be, that the Russian army is so experienced in armed struggle. Stop effing invading and annexing countries. That's why you're so experienced, because you keep invading places. Georgia, Chechnya, Ukraine. Gee whiz. Right, Ben Hodges talks about what's going on in the Middle East and concerning Iran actually as well, and the Red Sea. So UK, this is a quote I think from Lloyd Austin. UK, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Seychelles and Spain will join, Seychelles, odd one amongst all those countries, will join the US in the new mission. Ben Hodges questions why is Germany not there? The Pentagon announces international mission to counter attacks in the Red Sea. Ben Hodges goes on to say this is connected to Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia's only real ally, Iran, is working to create as many challenges for us as possible to divert support away from Ukraine. Do we and our allies have the will, capacity and capability to address these challenges? Russia benefits most from what Iran is doing. It distracts attention away from Ukraine. If we help Ukraine defeat Russia, Iran will lose power, capability. China is watching to see if we have the necessary will, industrial capacity, and military capacity, he says elsewhere. So this is all really important. And what happens... I mean, there are so many things going on, and one could argue, if you're being as cynical as possible or conspiratorial in your thinking as possible, that all of these things are being purposefully put in place to conspire to a point where the US and allies are unable to deal with everything, right? So we need to deal with everything all at once. We need to deal with what's going on in Israel-Palestine conflict. We need to deal with what's going on in the Red Sea with the Houthis and Iran. We need to deal with Iran and Syria and Taiwan and Ukraine, etc., etc. So all of this is happening at once, and China is just sitting back going, yeah, see how you cope with that. And there are going to be opportunists who are going to, start fires in different places, and the rest of the world need to come together to deal with all of these issues cooperatively and as effectively and efficiently as possible, because otherwise chaos will rule, and out of that chaos, I think players like China and Russia will emerge more, will emerge stronger. And that is a huge challenge. Right. French aid to Ukraine says the French company Decathlon, they're a big sports company. They have a lot of massive sports warehouses in the UK as well, and shops. Used a shell company to continue selling clothing in Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, according to an investigation by the investigative media Disclose outlet. However, it had announced that it would suspend its activity, so they've been found out. Let's hope that they get a slap on the wrist there. Carlsberg, who pulled out of Russia, had some of their entities basically stolen off them by Russia, and then said there's no way this is getting sorted out nicely, and they've gone a bit anti-Russia as a result. Now, Carlsberg has donated humanitarian aid to Ukraine in the form of 24,000 cans of non-alcoholic beer. So alcohol on the front line is obviously a big no-no. Indeed, alcohol was kind of banned for some time. I don't know what the situation is now in Ukraine, like formally at certain times and places. I'm not exactly sure what the rules were. But donating all this non-alcoholic beer, I think, is really cool. Good move. The economy of Ukraine lost more than €1 billion. In fact, they're saying may reach $1.5 billion. The decrease in the volume of foreign trade due to restrictions on the movement of freight transport through the western borders of Ukraine in November and December has amounted and will amount to an awful lot of cost to the Ukrainian economy, and that is a massive challenge going forward. Russian state media's rhetoric towards Finland is becoming increasingly bellicose. I probably should have had this together with that other bit. Sorry, so many things. I'm amazed I've got any vague order in this at all. Look how many tabs I have in the browser, and that's just one section. Should we look at both? Oh, goodness me, too much to talk about. Right, anyway, get on with it, Piers. The Russian state media's rhetoric towards Finland is becoming increasingly bellicose, and just to let the non-English speakers know what bellicose means, it means warlike. So from the Latin, whatever. Sergei Mardan says Putin's re-establishment of the Leningrad military district should, quote, cause a spasm in the stomach of every Finn and a vomiting attack from the horror. Of course, Putin's mentioned, he's announced the Leningrad military district will be created, but of course, does he have the trained personnel and the equipment in order to put them in place near the Finnish border? He's already been taking stuff away from there, air defense systems away from there, and taking them down to the front line. So, this seems a lot of rhetoric and, all fart and no poo, really. So, but this is ramping up rhetoric between the two nations that is I think goes to show what an own goal this has been for Russia. They started this war to get away from to create a buffer zone where there was no NATO, and they've pushed Ukraine further towards NATO whilst having the finished border now being a border with a NATO country, and Sweden also being on the edge of acceding to NATO. So yeah, not good for Russia there. And finally, this is important because the EU needs to be strong on migration, and it needs to be strong because there are loads of migration issues. Now, I'm moving away from all the humanitarian, compassionate look at migration, and I'm looking at immigration from a purely strategic, geopolitical point of view. Immigration is one of these divisive subjects that Russia hijacks and uses as a wedge topic to foment discord in countries. They do it in the US with the southern border. There'll be all sorts of people on Twitter and TikTok and YouTube and Facebook shouting about the issue of the southern border, making it sound a lot worse than it really is. And not saying it isn't bad, but it would be made to sound even worse by these Russian actors, bad faith actors, because they know what a divisive topic it is and how it can then foment discord that then leads to right-wing governments getting voted in, or authoritarian governments getting voted in that are more likely to favour Russia and less likely to favour Ukraine, right? So these things are connected. So when the EU comes out and says, so EU countries and the European Parliament has agreed on a reform that strengthens migration policy, according to Eva Johansson, the European Commissioner, that's good news. So Europe does need to be strong. It does need to tackle migration, which is a massive challenge, given that there are so many war-torn places around the world, given that there is a changing climate that will make places even more untenable to live in. You will start seeing more and more people trying to move towards more temperate regions that are richer, that have better welfare systems, that have better opportunities. It's a natural human desire to better your lives. Right, I've done that within my own country. I moved to a place that was better for my children. Right, it's a natural thing that we do. Human beings are going to do that. We need to somehow deal with that challenge in a humane and compassionate way. But that means that economic stability and security in general, national security and international security, is maintained. How do we do that? I don't know, and I don't know what the details are here, but these kind of moves are probably beneficial for the EU in terms of staving off opportunities for Russia to poke the hornet's nest. Anyway, that's my tuppence. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support. This was another long one. There's so much news.